Our next panel involves moderator Minty Tafisi from RSM, who's going to talk about the convergence of data, identity and payments. Minty, of course, is the principal at RSM Australia, where she specialises in transfer pricing and international tax. You have all the fun stuff. Minty's passionate about assisting Australian tech companies in expanding overseas. She's a graduate of finance from Melbourne Uni and takes a keen interest in FinTech. Minty, come on up. You are the first contestant on data, identity and payments. Give her a hand, come on. Now, Damir Kuchar is the CEO and founder of Basic. It's Australia's leading API platform. Yes! Go wild, crowd! He's used his skills to develop tech solutions to help companies increase efficiency, productivity, and their bottom line. Basic is the culmination of his engineering skills and early experiences with money. How to spend it when you're trying to build a business. All right, Kuskal. Now, this is one of the OG fintechs, I reckon. Nathan Churchwood is domain lead. I think about it, that business is nearly 50 years old. I think it's about 45 when it first kicked off. Of course, current incarnation, 97. Products in Nathan's domain include real-time payments, direct entry, BPay, agency banking services. He leads Kuskal's involvement in Australia's new payments platform, the MPP, both in product development as well as through industry representation and client engagement. Nathan, great to have you here, mate. The Global Chief Operating Officer of IDverse is Josh Reid. It's the new name for OCR Labs. Josh has over 25 years of experience in leadership roles on sales, product, operations in software, data and ICT B2B organisations. He's an innovative organisational and people leader with proven commercial and technical acumen. Welcome to you, Josh. And finally, the fabulous Claire Rhodes, Commercial Director at Identity. She brings a global perspective to FinTech, leveraging over 20 years of experience driving growth partnerships and market expansion. That's enough from me. Give them one more clap. Over to you guys. Minty, take it away.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this session on behalf of the panels here. Before we get started, I would like to say a couple of words in order to set the scene. The first one is, of course, in light of the unprecedented level of innovation in this space, and in particular the worldwide shift towards open economy, payment processing has undergone significant change. This is also partly because of the increased use of bio-identity authentication. On the other hand, this space has had few challenges. It will not be an exaggeration if we say that, following the cyber attacks we've all heard in recent years, trust in this area has been a very difficult one to continue to do so. So in this session, we will be discussing about the convergence of identity, data and payment system and its ability in creating an ecosystem that can facilitate interaction, frictionless interaction amongst market participants. If we get this right, I'm an economist by trade, so I like to talk about GDPs. So if we get this right, in fact, the sort of research that indicates is our GDP could grow by about 1.5% in the next 5 to 7 years. So for a lot of you here on this stage, as well as out there that are entrepreneurs, the opportunity to use the convergence of these three elements is going to be a great opportunity. Without further ado, I would like to ask the panel members to initially look at the three elements separately. So identity, data, and payments. And Josh, may I start with you when it comes to identity?
Yeah, I think with identity, particularly in this ecosystem, the first thing is to establish that level of trust. And trust in the identity that the person that you are interacting with is who they say they are, that you can confirm they're live and present. The second part of that is therefore that they are allowed to have full control of their data and over who then has access to that data with their permission. So establishing from the identity that level of trust to enable the rest of the ecosystem.
Excellent. And of course that follows with data, and there has been an enormous amount of new events in this space with CDR and etc. So Damir, could you give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think I'm sure everybody knows what CDR is or what it's about. For those who don't, it's the ability for consumers to securely share their financial data or energy data and soon non-bank lending data with another third party. So we've made some really big leaps, I think, as an industry overall, making sure that that's available. And I think one of the things that kind of excites me, particularly about this topic, is that what I do see is this convergence happening between the three different elements. And every single one of them has something unique to offer. Identity from a trust perspective, data from a consent management perspective, and payments to actually do something useful with that as well. So, and I think and then the second part that kind of excites me in all of this is that if you look at the effort that's required to deliver any product or to market, there's a significant amount of work that goes into it. And anyone who's on the other side will end up doing at least 5 different agreements, 5 different supplier agreements with a payment provider, identity provider, data provider. And there's just a whole heap of repetition happening across the market, and I think a lot of lost opportunity as well. So bringing these things together, I'm quite excited, and I think we're getting closer.
Great, thank you. Of course, the third element is payments, and Nathan?
Well, I think everyone would be very aware of the reduction of cash, but what we've seen is a huge growth in digital payments over the last few years. It suddenly rocketed up. What that means is also then the number of ways that people are using it. We've talked about use cases in many of the other conversations, but we're also seeing people having money in many more locations. So digital wallets, distribution of their funds, and using best case. That means we actually are moving into an ecosystem, and what we're seeing there is that there is an increase in scams and frauds leveraging the movement of fast money throughout the ecosystem. I think that sets us up to have this conversation around how do we leverage then the data and the identity to apply to the payments to protect consumers, and then continue to grow those very exciting and valuable use cases that we've started to see coming up over the last few years.
It's going to make our life much easier. And Claire, if I may, it seems that the convergence of these 3 elements is almost inevitable. It's a matter of time. And my question is, how can the fintech industry can play a role to minimize the sort of risk associated in this space, but also establish a firmer, if possible, digital trust amongst market participants?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one. And just to clear one thing up before we get started, the name of the company is Identity, but we don't do digital identity. So hence why the questions aren't coming to me. Look, I think, the convergence is inevitable, and, Demir, as you said before, and I think it's, one thing that's really important is to understand, why that convergence is inevitable. And for me, it kind of comes back to the fact that we need to remember why we're collecting information, why we're sharing information. Why is it so important that identity is verified and shared where it needs to be? And I think, that comes down to protecting humans, protecting consumers from crime, particularly in the landscape that we're in, with increasing cybercrime, most of which is financial in nature. I think FinTech plays a really important role in how we can help make sure that those 3 things are brought together in a really seamless way. Right now we often operate in silos, country silos, corporate silos, but coming together to establish those trusted third-party networks and building ecosystems around them, I think, is going to be vital to how we bring it all together.
Excellent, thank you. I guess, Josh, this is probably, the part I would like to come to you. And this is regarding solutions where individuals can have control over their own identity information. And also to be able to provide or decide who we give those information to. And of course, with this comes the digital identity aspect too. I know there is quite a bit to cover there, but if you could, and then I'll open up that same session for everyone else to comment on.
Yes, certainly. And I guess we're talking about next generation digital identity, moving towards, generative AI that's helping us to train these neural network engines that enable us to get significantly high levels of accuracy in identity. And a couple of core elements with that is, we need to ensure that the person that is holding the identity card or information, the government-issued identity document, is who they say they are, that the document is genuine and in no way fraudulent, that the information on that document and the image matches in an unbiased way to a non-biased biometric engine, that that person is who they say they are and they're live and present. And that's done in a medium that is both a good or exceptional customer experience, that it also mitigates fraud as an outcome and also helps to meet your compliance requirements. So using those technologies in a convenient way, both from an enrolment to perhaps an environment like this that then gives you control of those access and permission side of things, is that you also then have an ability to re-authenticate again through a good customer experience in a couple of seconds, that in fact you are who you say you are throughout the ecosystem. So bringing those two things together with the next generation of identity solutions, it enables you to get that highest level of trust at the beginning and then also check that trust throughout your interactions within the ecosystem, and therefore you create what we need in terms of control and management of who has access to our data.
Excellent. Nathan, in terms of this, ongoing check of identity, once you establish the identity, and as Josh said, there could also be, sort of a payment threshold, a related identity check. For example, if the transaction we're talking about is just only $100, etc., the initial trust identity check can go on, but all of a sudden I'm transacting 200,000. How does that play?
I think from the payment perspective, as we're seeing more integration of payments into processes and systems and platforms, that does give the opportunity to add additional data points. I spend a lot of my time at the moment talking about Pay2, and one of the things I like about the future of Pay2, it's fairly simple now, but it will actually converge with data and carry all of the additional data that comes from the provider and passes it through to the bank for that level of authorization that can be linked back to the account holder, and then the party that is being paid can trust that that payment is coming from the person who purports to be who they are, which then down the track reduces chargebacks, disputes and others. So it's not just about fraud, it's also about friction and risk that is all through the payment ecosystem. I talked about the risk of scams. If you know who you're dealing with, that becomes very important.
Damir, how about the role data plays in this ongoing identity establishment initially and then the ongoing check? And how does that come with a sort of CDR and other related events around this?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think, and I guess the challenge that I've got for the audience is that, because I think a lot of you come from different organizations where you're implementing or leveraging these capabilities, is not to think about them as isolated silos, but to think about, as you've heard here, how do you overlap? How do you overlap data with identity? How do you overlap data with payments, payments with identity, and vice versa? And I think that's where the nuggets of gold will come in. To give you some kind of practical examples, leveraging CDR to capture account information when you're setting up an actual direct debit, or leveraging CDR to be able to prove account ownership, or leveraging CDR to be able to check that there's sufficient funds, or the optimal time to extract the funds from the actual account based on certain circumstances. So I think we're in the industry at the moment where we have all the tools are there, and I think what we've traditionally done is looked at, okay, I have to do identities, I'm going to implement that, now I'm done, I'm going to do the data, I'm going to continue on, now I'm going to do the payments. But I think combining it and thinking about how I'm going to leverage each one of them to take advantage, I think is going to be a great step forward. CDR itself does have an element that is quite powerful, and that's the consent management framework itself. Because with any interaction, there's an exchange. Consumer comes in, you need some information, you provide a service in return. CDR has an excellent framework that you can use to leverage to be able to establish that connectivity with the individual, so to make sure that you can kind of extend it to be able to both do an identity check and both set up the payment as well, kind of going forward. So the tools are there. I guess we're just waiting for the innovation to happen.
Well,
sounds like a call to action for this group.
Well, innovation will come and with the level of the intense developments that's probably around the corner. But I guess before we get to that, there is also a role governments and regulators play. Claire, can I bring you to, bring us up to speed in terms of, do we have the regulatory framework? Do we have the infrastructure? And also, while covering regulation, what are the burdens that actually can impinge upon innovation and as well as interaction between these three elements?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. To me, you just talked about innovation. Maybe we can have that from regulators as well to work together and stop being a little bit so siloed. But part of the challenge we've got is that we think about regulation and you have privacy regulations and they're telling you to keep your data in-house and to keep your data onshore. And then you have financial crime regulations which are telling you that you need to share it with somebody else when they need it. So having the data that you need when you need it in the form that you need it is really hard. Outside of things like CDR, when you're thinking about sharing it for that compliance reason, it's still being done by spreadsheet and email. So it's a huge burden on organisations to be able to meet those compliance obligations while still being able to, do business and grow. So I would say regulation needs to come about with innovation at its heart. So regulators need to regulate for innovation as opposed to regulate for particular problems, I think, that they're trying to solve for. We still need to solve those problems because if we don't have all of those bits and pieces lined up, it's going to be even harder. But I think regulators like the industry coming together to actually look at it from all right, how do we actually make this easier? How do we get the intelligence that we need is a key piece.
I can just add.
Sure.
I think one of the kind of frustrating things at the moment, and I think missed opportunities, that all of these initiatives are playing out independently. So you've got TDIF, which has its own framework, and it's all to do with identity. You've got CDR, which is all to do with data, and then you've got MPP, Pay2, which is all to do with payments. And none of them are talking to each other. And I think that's a really missed opportunity. And one of those things that we're seeing right now is the whole, when Pay2 proliferates and CDR is here, if an individual or an application needs to access data and set up Pay2, they're going to be redirected to the banks twice in a single flow. And that's going to create a phenomenal amount of friction and a lot of missed opportunities. So it's a problem that's just around the corner waiting to happen.
Well, they say time flies fast when you have fun. So I've just been flagged that there are a few minutes to go. So I'm afraid I'm not going to cover a couple of very important areas, but I would like to hear concluding remark from each and every of you in terms of what this convergence can bring by way of opportunity, but also in terms of having a much better trust where us, consumers, suppliers, and the entire stakeholder can have a better trust in the digital system, because we all are scared about our identities and being hacked and whatnot. So may I start with you, Claire?
Yeah, sure. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could identify all of the good actors in the world so that it would be easy to know who the bad ones were and just to keep them out of the system? I mean, that's a wonderful utopia. But I think and that for me, it just comes back to the why. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because to give consumers choice. We're doing this to protect people. And I think we've just got to keep that at front of mind because, there needs to be more trust in the system so that we can achieve those goals.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. Good and bad actors, I can identify who they are, not necessarily whether they're good or bad, but who the person is. And I think it's important also with the next generation of technologies is that it's inclusionary for everyone. We've seen a lot of bias in some of the engines around the world, and the next generations need to have a zero bias, so that includes all races, all their ethnicities, all socio-economic backgrounds, so they have access to these services and they're inclusionary within the businesses. And then you can trust the identity that you've actually established and therefore access the services we're talking about today.
Thank you, Josh.
Well, I think from a B2B perspective and FinTech's creating capability for the market. If we can bring that element of trust, and then they can trust the consumer can trust them, we actually can bring these converged solutions to market that at the moment are really tough. And it means that there are a lot of barriers to entry. So I think that will reduce the barriers that we all face.
Cool. I'm going to take a bit of a different angle. In Sweden, there's a concept that they've had for a long time called Bank ID. And effectively, what you're doing is you're leveraging your banking details to identify yourself. It's so popular and so common that you can go and purchase alcohol online using your banking details because they use it as an age verification concept. I think that's inevitable for Australia. I think CDR itself has brought one of the kind of biggest advantages it's brought together is this authorization identity framework. And I think that it's only a matter of time before we bring these things together and start to see online the ability to log in or sign up using your banking details or using your energy details.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this session. I would have taken questions, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. Could you please thank the panel members?